Funding for the Maddy Report is made possible by grants from the California Emerging Technology Fund, leaders in the quest for digital equity. The James Irvine Foundation, committed to a California where all low-income workers have the power to advance economically. Fresno State Associated Students, Inc., students serving students. BNSF Railway, moving our economy for 160 years. And The Wonderful Company. The Maddy Report is also made possible thanks to contributions from Harris Ranch Inn and Restaurant and E&J Gallo Winery. From the Maddy Institute, the Public Policy Institute for the Valley's 4 public universities, this is the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Keppler.
Welcome. The importance of STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and math, is only growing. Indeed, employment in STEM occupations is projected to grow 8.8% by 2028. Our guest is Niu Gao. She's a senior fellow at the non-partisan Public Policy Institute of California, specializing in K-12 education with an emphasis in math and science education. And Ms. Gao has written something that's kind of interesting. She says that STEM education is crucial in preparing our future workforce and paving the way for well-paying employment. But I found particularly interesting what you wrote was a robust and equitable science education is essential to a fully functioning democracy. So welcome to the Maddy Report.
Thank you for having me.
So why do you say that? Why do you say that, science education, science literacy is essential to a fully functioning democracy?
Mm-hmm. So in July 2021, the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine released a report calling to action for science education. In that report, it emphasized that scientific thinking and also understanding are essentially for all people navigating the world, not just for scientists and STEM professionals. Science is the essential tool for solving the greatest problem of our time and also understanding the world around us because it teaches us how to make decisions based on evidence. And many of the most pressing social and also political issues nowadays involve science. During COVID-19, we've seen how science was used to guide when and how to reopen restaurants, schools, and also local business. Science also guides our decisions about how to maintain air quality, how to conserve water during a drought, and also what to do about all of this plastics waste. So in this way, science literacy is an essential component of a fully functional democracy.
Yeah, you want policy based on facts, and you're going to get that if you know math and science, I suppose. But you've written this, which is a little troubling. You said, quote, science has long been a low priority for California K-12 schools, and COVID-19 has disrupted efforts to ensure that all students receive a quality science education. So how do the U.S. and California compare when it comes to science education?
So generally speaking, the U.S. lags behind other developed countries in science education. And California actually ranks near the bottom of states on the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP. It is also known as the nation's report card. So for instance, based on the 2015 NAEP, the average science test scores in California were well below the national average. And only 25% of 4th and 8th graders in California were proficient in science. And the number hasn't really changed much for years. And we also know that California has the largest science achievement gaps by race, ethnicity, and also by family income. So for instance, there is a 36 points difference between Black and white students. And there's also a similar gap between low-income students and also affluent students.
Yeah, and we have a very diverse population, so it just exacerbates that problem. Let me ask you this. You reported in 2013 that the State Board of Education laid the groundwork to transform science education by adopting something called the California Next Generation Science Standards. Then COVID hit. So what are the implications?
So before spring of 2020, school districts were in the early stages of implementing California NGSS. And we recently released a report, which I'm part of the team. In the report, we show that COVID-19 has derailed science education. So before spring 2020, more than 90% of the districts were implementing CA NGSS. And this was actually a remarkable improvement from a few years ago. But we also know that implementation was uneven by grade levels. So for instance, school districts were more likely to be implementing the new standards in K-8 schools than in high schools. We also saw some geographic variation where rural schools are actually lagging behind. And during COVID-19, what we've seen is science education became a lower priority for the majority of school districts. And districts delayed some of the key implementation activities, such as aligning instruction materials and also aligning course models with the standards. There were several factors that could explain this. This includes, emphasis on math and English language arts, which this actually goes beyond the pandemic. There is also staff shortages, teacher burnout, and also a lack of dedicated funding for science education. We also saw that, science education, districts provided limited support for science education. During 2020 to 21 school year, only 25% of the districts provided small group instruction, and very few of them offered extended science learning time during the regular school year. And only 40% of the districts provided additional support to English learners.
It seems probably problematic. School districts aren't prioritizing science education. Why is that a problem?
So earlier we talked about the importance of science literacy to a fully functioning democracy, to the future of STEM workforce, and also to the pursuit of living wage jobs. So this lack of prioritization means that students will likely not have access to equitable, high-quality science education, and they will also miss out on opportunities to recover from the pandemic and also to equip them with the knowledge and skills to meet the needs of tomorrow's economy.
So let me ask you, in the next segment, I want to ask you, what about raising high school graduation requirements in math and science? Is that possibly an answer? We'll have that conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. Are California's math and science requirements for high school too high, too low, or just right? Our guest is Niu Gao. She's a senior fellow with the Public Policy Institute of California, a public policy think tank. She specializes in K-12 math and science education, and she recently authored a report on that issue. Your report included some pretty startling statistics. One I found startling was the fact that only 63% of California students enroll in college after graduating from high school. And those rates are even lower when you take a look at ethnic and racial groups and those folks from socioeconomically disadvantaged backgrounds. It makes you wonder if the state's high school graduation standards might be leaving students unprepared for college. How do California standards compare nationally?
In California, the state minimum graduation requirements is 2 years of math and 2 years of science. This is among the lowest in the US. And in California, the state hasn't really changed the minimum math or science requirements since the early 2000s. But at the same time, a lot of states did. And before COVID-19, the vast majority of other states actually require 3 or 4 years of math and science. The state set up the minimum requirements, and local districts can impose additional local requirements. And in the past 2 decades, many school districts across the state have increased high school graduation requirements, particularly in math and science, in order to improve student outcomes and close the equity gaps.
So I'm just wondering how many school districts actually did that, raise those standards? And the other question I had was, when I was reading your report, you talk about something called the AG requirement. I'm wondering how that influences the standards.
So most districts have higher standards than the state's minimum. In 2018-19 school year, we found that 59% of districts, serving nearly 70% of the student population, required 3 or 4 years of math, and 22% of districts required 3 to 4 years of science. And we also saw that a growing number of districts have aligned or consider aligning their graduation policies with the A2G requirements. So the A2G requirements are a set of courses that students must take in order to be eligible for UC and CSU. We also saw that many districts adopted A2G curriculum. So for instance, they require that all of their courses in the core subject areas be A2G approved. And before the COVID-19, we also saw that UC and CSU were considering increasing the admission requirements in math and science.
Yeah, that will certainly drive things. I found it interesting in your report, though, when you're looking at school districts that are raising the standards, a substantial number increased the math standards, but not so many increased the science standards. I thought that was kind of interesting. You'd think they'd both go parallel. That really wasn't the case. Now I'm wondering, so you have COVID-19, that's obviously affected graduation requirements in California, particularly in light of the fact that a lot of these school districts raised their standards prior to the pandemic. And what are the implications of all of that?
Yeah, so the pandemic has disrupted public education as we know it. So it had a significant impact on the graduating class of 2020. So for instance, in the spring of 2020, when virtually all of the public schools closed and moved to distance learning overnight, we saw that many students, particularly students from marginalized groups, did not have adequate access to internet or computer devices at home. And many teachers did not have adequate training to deliver instruction in a remote setting. And they also were not able to cover as much material as in a typical classroom. And students also lost access to course counseling and other academic support services. And also, not all parents were able to help children learn or provide a very adequate learning environment. And we also saw that food, housing, economic insecurity going up, disproportionately affecting low-income families and also students of color. Because all of those pandemic disruptions, so many students were not able to meet the course or GPA requirements for high school graduation. So as a policy response, in spring 2020, the state waived the minimum graduation requirements, and many school districts across the state passed emergency waivers exempting high school seniors from local graduation requirements. And some districts were also considering extending the waivers for the future classes.
Yeah, it's interesting because these the kind of the marginal students seem to have really suffered as a result of COVID-19. And also, when we talk about some of these disadvantaged communities, a lot of these, and rural communities, a lot of these are the same communities that don't have internet access, which, as we know, was absolutely critical during the pandemic because that's how school was being taught. So COVID had a big impact on some of those folks. We're wondering, would setting higher standards actually result in better student performance? We're going to talk about that in a moment. This is Mark Keppler with the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with Niu Gao. She's an expert in K-12 math and science education at the Public Policy Institute of California. It's a nonpartisan public policy think tank. So what about setting higher graduation requirements? Is that going to improve performance? So what does your research show? Does it show any correlation between more rigorous math and science requirements and academic outcomes?
So in the research literature, we have plenty of evidence showing that students who take more rigorous math or science courses in high school, they're more likely to graduate from high school. They're more likely to attend a four-year college. They're also more likely to earn more college credits, have higher college GPAs, and are more likely to earn bachelor's degree. So however, findings are more mixed on the impact of graduation policies per se on course taking, high school graduation, and college outcomes, particularly among students with greater needs. So one possible explanation is that many schools do not strictly enforce their graduation policies. So evidence from other states show that some students have been able to graduate even if they did not earn enough credits.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Let's see if we get more specific, kind of bifurcate, split up math and science. Let's talk about math for a second. What relationship do you find between raising math requirements and student outcomes?
So PPIC released a study that came out last year. And basically in that report, we found that rigorous math standards are associated with positive effects. So for instance, higher math standards are associated with a significant improvement in most student outcomes. Students are more likely to take advanced math courses, such as Algebra 2 or higher. They're more likely to complete the A to G requirements, and they're also more likely to take the SAT. So in contrary to the concern that some students may not be able to graduate and therefore drop out of high school, we actually did not find any evidence suggesting that higher math standards are associated with a change in dropout rates.
Yeah, so what about higher science standards? Is it any different when it comes to student outcomes?
So the evidence is a little bit more mixed when it comes to higher science standards. So we do see that dropout rates went down among districts with higher science standards. So this suggests a positive change in student engagement. But there doesn't seem to be any significance in other student outcomes, such as enrollment in advanced science courses or the student performance on the California science tests. Even though the association with other academic outcomes was largely negative, we do see some positive effects, for instance, at high poverty schools, where they saw their graduation rates and also advanced course enrollment went up.
So I'm wondering, why is there a difference between higher math requirements that show significant improvement in student outcomes, but higher science requirements really don't? Why are the results mixed?
It is a puzzle. We do see that higher science requirements improve student attendance and reduce dropout. It has negative associations with other outcomes. So, one possible explanation is that science is not a priority in most schools. It has taken a backseat to math and English language arts, and as a result, most districts do not invest enough resources or provide adequate academic support to make sure that students in those rigorous courses are actually succeeding. So we know that raising academic rigor is one part of the equation, but the other part is to provide a comprehensive support system so students can succeed.
Yeah, I'm just wondering though, what are the unintended consequences of all of this? I mean, if you raise standards, is it more likely that folks are going to drop out? I mean, you're trying to improve student outcomes, but could there be a negative effect with this, with raising standards?
From the evidence from other states, there were several unintended consequences of raising high school graduation requirements. One concern is the graduation rates may decline for low-income students, Latinos, Black students, and also students with disabilities. And a second concern is that in California, we actually saw that high-need districts tend to have higher standards. So this raises some concern about the equity implications. However, in our report, we do not see any evidence of this. So in other words, higher standards do not prevent students in California from graduating or increase their likelihood of dropping out.
Well, that's good news for those of us that want to see higher standards, I guess. Well, up next, so what are the recommendations for school districts? What should they do when it comes to math and science requirements? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with Niu Gao. She's a senior fellow with the Non-Partisan Public Policy Institute of California. She specializes in K-12 education with math and science in particular. And we're talking about whether raising academic standards in math and science are a good or bad idea. If it's a good idea, what should we do to improve student outcomes across the board? So let me ask you this. Bottom line, what do your findings suggest about raising academic standards?
So there are three key takeaways. So the first is rigorous math and science courses have been shown to improve student outcomes in high school, in college, and also in the labor market. The second takeaway is raising academic expectations in high need, high poverty, high Black Latino schools actually benefits students attending those schools. The last takeaway is rural schools and also lowest performing schools, they're less likely to benefit from raising academic expectations. This suggests that we need to establish a more comprehensive support system and also to provide technical assistance to those schools.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if it matters. You talk about socioeconomically disadvantaged districts or not. Does it matter between those districts? And what about rural and urban? Does that matter?
So in our work, we do not find any negative relationship between higher math or science requirements and graduation rates, regardless of school type. When we look at the likelihood of students taking advanced math courses, the positive effect is actually much larger among high need, high poverty, and also urban schools. When we look at the share of students,
does that imply that we're closing the achievement gap then in those areas?
Yes. So those are actually moving towards more equitable student outcomes.
A good thing.
Yes, that's a good thing. And when we look at the share of students taking the SAT, again, the gain is also larger and high need, high poverty, and high Black Latino schools, suggesting some improvement along the equity measures. And we also see that higher science requirements reduce dropout rate. And again, the association is much stronger among high need, high poverty, high Black Latino, the lowest performing schools, and also urban schools.
It's somewhat though, when you say that, it's somewhat counterintuitive. And I was reading your report, but then when you raise standards, that you have a lower dropout rate. It seems like it gets tougher. Maybe students would drop out, but that's not what you're finding.
Yes. So taken together, those findings from our report actually suggest that raising academic expectations, especially in those high need, high poverty, and high Black Latino schools, benefit those students attending those schools, while students in rural and also the lowest performing schools, they're less likely to benefit. And this is, there are a couple of factors that could explain the difference. So the first one is, the rural schools and also the lowest performing schools, they tend to have a lot more acute teacher shortage and turnover issues. So which may affect the quantity and also quality of those math and science courses.
Yeah, I wanted to, because I saw that in your report too, and I thought that was also very important, that these poorer school districts might be able to get more teachers, but typically they're younger, they're less experienced teachers, right? They're probably paying them a little less than the richer districts, and that has impact on how students do their outcomes in math and science.
Yes. So actually, we have a lot of evidence showing that, it has been really challenging trying to turn around those persistently low performing schools. And moving forward, if we really want to help those low income schools and also low performing schools, we actually need a more systematic and also more significant transformation to help those schools succeed.
Yeah. So what are the recommendations you have for state and local policymakers when it comes to ensuring high school graduation policies have an equitable impact in terms of college readiness and workforce readiness?
So the state could consider raising the minimum math requirements, just given all the positive effects we've seen for students attending schools or districts that have those higher requirements. And so the only downside is it comes with a cost, because it will be a statewide mandate, and that will require additional dollars. But since, in our report, since most of the students, nearly 70% of the students are already in schools that require 3 to 4 years math, we think, this actually could reduce the cost. And there's also evidence that, higher math requirements, we talked about this, led to more equitable improvement in student outcomes. So the cost can be thought of as a long-term investment in California's future. And in order to address some of the unintended consequences we've talked about, the state could monitor the implementation so the additional math coursework does not take away resources.
Yeah, but the one thing that we mentioned in your report, and we talked about this off camera, and that is you didn't say increase science requirements, which I thought was kind of interesting, just math requirements. And that the reason for that is?
Yeah, so in science, we're seeing more of a mixed evidence. So we think, we need more robust data and also need more comprehensive data before we can make, any policy recommendations.
We've only got about 30 seconds left in the segment, but I want to be sure you get into your other points. You want to say something about, I was reading your report about COVID and about data collection.
Yeah, so more granular data, such as individual student level longitudinal data the state is working to build, could really help us, guiding the research and also policy effort. And in terms of COVID, we just have some data from NAEP showing how much damage COVID-19 has done to students. So how to help those students recover will be the #1 priority moving forward.
Well, I want to thank Niu Gao with the Public Policy Institute of California for joining us, and thank you for joining us. This is Mark Keppler with the Maddy Report. The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Maddy Institute. If you'd like to share your thoughts about today's episode of the Maddy Report, please visit our website at maddyinstitute.org.